Detention block. Gamma felt less like a prison and more like the inside of a giant, perfectly smooth egg. Sergeant Eva Rostova ran a hand along the wall of their cell. Seamless. No joins, no screws, no vents. Just a cool off-white surface that curved up to meet the ceiling, where flat panels glowed with soft, even light. Everything was designed. Everything was intentional. Everything was Cathar. Sharing the cell with her were Corporal Jian Li, whom everyone called Gizmo for his way with machines, and Private Anton Volkov, nicknamed Brick, for reasons that became obvious the moment you saw his wide shoulders. They were captured 3 weeks ago, their patrol cruiser overwhelmed by the Cathar fleet near the Kepler belt. Now, they were inmates on the starbase Vigilant, a testament to Cathar efficiency and cold logic. The Cathar themselves were unsettling. Tall, thin insectoids with multiple limbs, they moved with precise, jerky motions. Their large, black, compound eyes scanned everything, but showed no emotion. Their guards patrolled Block Gamma with unwavering regularity. Rostova had timed them. A patrol passed their cell door exactly every 15.7 standard minutes. Not 15.6, not 15.8. Exactly 15.7. Predictability was the Cathar way. Their cell was a marvel of automated control. Twice a day, a slot in the wall dispensed a bland but nutritious paste. Once every 8 hours, a faint humming filled the cell, and shimmering waves of energy, the sanitation field, pulsed from floor to ceiling, vaporizing any waste or unauthorized objects. It was clean, efficient, and soul-crushingly inescapable. The Cathar had analyzed thousands of escape attempts by dozens of species. This prison was their answer, designed to eliminate every statistically probable method of breaking out. Hope didn't seem to factor into their calculations. Gizmo spent most of his time listlessly tracing patterns on the floor. Brick did push-ups and stared at the wall. Morale was low. What could you do against perfect logic? But Rostova watched. She observed. Logic, she knew, had patterns, and patterns could sometimes be exploited. Her attention focused on 2 things the Cathar system seemed to deem unimportant. First, the sanitation field. While it disintegrated dropped food scraps or torn bits of uniform instantly, it always ignored the thin, almost invisible layer of dust and lint that gathered in the corners. It was mostly tiny fibers shed from their standard-issue jumpsuits and dead skin cells. To the Cathar sensors, it was likely just background noise, statistically insignificant debris not worth the energy to target. Second, the nutrient dispenser. Just before the paste emerged, there was a faint click, click, click. 3 distinct sounds. Why 3? 1 click should be enough to open the valve. It was a tiny inefficiency, a slight mechanical redundancy, illogical. 1 evening cycle. As the main lights dimmed slightly, Rostova spoke quietly. Gizmo, Brick, notice the corners? Gizmo glanced over, uninterested. Yeah, Sarge. Dusty. So? The sanitation field doesn't touch it, Rostova said. It cleans everything else, even a hair if I pluck one out, but not the lint. It's lint, Sarge, Gizmo sighed. Worthless. Below the mass threshold for the field, probably. Exactly, Rostova said, her voice low and intense. It ignores things it calculates as worthless, without obvious purpose. Same with the dispenser. That triple click is unnecessary mechanical noise. What if we use those blind spots? What if we give the worthless a purpose? Gizmo frowned, sitting up slightly. He tapped a finger against his temple. Give lint a purpose? How? And how does the click help? Brick asked, stopping his pacing. The Cathar rely on their sensors, their programming, Rostova explained. They ignore what doesn't fit expected threat parameters. The lint is harmless debris. The click is acceptable machine noise. If we can manipulate those ignored things, maybe we can create something the system isn't programmed to detect. Gizmo rubbed his chin, a spark returning to his eyes. Manipulate lint? And a clicking noise? It's deeply illogical. So are we, Corporal, Rostova said, a tiny smile touching her lips. That might be our only advantage. Gizmo looked at the dispenser, then at the dusty corner. He slowly nodded. Okay, Sarge. It's crazy. But maybe Cathar logic is so perfect. It's brittle. What do you need? Brick. Rostova turned to the big private. I need you to make some noise, cause distractions on cue. Can you do that? Brick grinned. Making noise? Sarge, I was born for that. Good, Rostova said, looking at the smooth, inescapable walls. Because we're going to use lint, noise, and flawed logic to get out of this perfect cell. The plan was barely a seed, fragile and improbable. But for the first time in weeks, it felt like something other than despair was growing in the sterile Cathar prison. It felt like a very illogical flicker of hope. Their new routines started subtly. So subtly, Rostova hoped, that the Cathar surveillance wouldn't flag them as coordinated. Gizmo took charge of the nutrient dispenser. Just before it was scheduled to activate, he'd splash a few drops of his drinking water near the dispenser slot, often accidentally wiping it with his sleeve afterwards. Sometimes, this caused the mechanism inside to sputter when the paste came out. Occasionally, a few extra drops of water would leak out after it closed. Scrap heap, Gizmo would complain loudly, kicking the wall near the dispenser. This thing leaks, and it clicks like a broken clock. A Cathar guard would eventually arrive, summoned by the automated system detecting a complaint. The insectoid would stand stiffly, its multifaceted eyes scanning the dispenser. Unit 735, its synthesized voice would buzz. Dispenser provides designated nutrient volume. Internal diagnostics register optimal function. Clicking noise within acceptable parameters. Leakage negligible. Negligible? My sleeve is damp, Gizmo would argue, holding up his arm. Moisture levels within environmental tolerance. Request denied, the guard would state, then pivot sharply and march away. But during those brief interactions, while the guard ran its pointless diagnostics, Gizmo's eyes were busy. He noted the exact way the internal valve clicked. And more importantly, he noticed tiny, almost microscopic flakes of metal sometimes came loose from the mechanism when it sputtered. Using a sticky finger pad moistened with his own saliva, he began discreetly collecting these minute shavings whenever he could, hiding them in the seam of his trousers. Brick, meanwhile, established a new, incredibly annoying exercise routine. Exactly 1 minute before the sanitation field activated, he would go to the corner Rostova had indicated, the one where the most lint seemed to gather, and begin a series of loud jumping jacks and stomping exercises. He claimed it got the blood flowing before the creepy cleaning waves. The noise was irritating, but not technically against regulations. Each stomp, each jump, pressed the nearly invisible layer of dust and lint further into the corner, compacting it slightly day by day. He also developed a habit of clumsily dropping his water bulb at random moments, causing a clatter that sometimes made the patrolling guards pause for a fraction of a second. Rostova's role was patience. Using single threads carefully pulled from the hem of her uniform jumpsuit, small enough that the sanitation field ignored them, she began the painstaking process of gathering the compacted dust Brick was creating. She'd pretend to stretch or rest near the corner after Brick's noisy routine, her fingers subtly sweeping the nearly invisible fluff into a tiny, growing ball. She kept it tucked into a fold of her bedding. It looked like nothing more than a clump of dryer lint, far below the mass and complexity threshold to trigger the sanitation field. One day, during Brick's accidental dropping of his water bulb, the ceramic bulb hit the floor just right, and a tiny razor-sharp shard flaked off near the wall. Before the next sanitation sweep, Rostova had palmed it, adding it to her minuscule collection of worthless items. Miles away, in the central monitoring hub of Starbase Vigilant, Cathar Warden Xylar reviewed the daily anomaly reports for Detention Block Gamma. Unit 734, Rostova, was flagged for accumulating low-mass fibrous debris, categorized under potential nesting behavior, though illogical for the species. Unit 735, Gizmo, flagged for repeated non-critical equipment complaints, attributed to probable psychological stress. Unit 736, Brick, flagged for adherence to inefficient, high-impact kinetic patterns, deemed random energy expenditure. Xylar processed the data. The humans were exhibiting disorganized, inefficient behaviors, consistent with mammalian species under long-term confinement. None of the actions correlated with known escape methodologies in the Cathar database. The debris was below sanitation thresholds. The complaints were unfounded. The exercise was pointless. Logic dictated these were insignificant deviations. Xylar archived the flags and moved on to analyzing power grid efficiency. The humans' illogical actions were precisely why they were harmless. Back in the cell, during the night cycle when the lights were lowest, the real work happened. Shielded from direct view by Brick pretending to sleep, Gizmo took out the collected treasures, the tiny ball of lint, the minuscule metal shavings, and the sharp ceramic shard. Using the shard as a microscopic tool, he began meticulously arranging the metal shavings onto the lint ball. "The lint fibers," he whispered, barely moving his lips. "They don't conduct electricity well. They'll insulate the pathways. The metal shavings, if I can line them up just right, like tiny wires." His goal was absurdly simple and incredibly complex: to create a tiny, single-use electromagnetic pulse generator. An EMP, not a big one, nothing like in the movies. Just a tiny burst, focused, lasting less than a second. He planned to power it with static electricity. "Every time Brick does his stomping dance, I rub my jumpsuit against the floor," Gizmo explained softly. "Builds up a small static charge. If I can make a capacitor, store just enough." Could it work? Could lint and metal dust, powered by static cling, actually disable a Cathar magnetic door lock, even for a millisecond? It was laughably primitive, illogical. One day, as the 15.7-minute patrol approached, Gizmo subtly nudged the incomplete device with his foot, rolling the small lint ball near the cell door just before the Cathar guards marched past. Rostova held her breath. The lead guard's compound eyes swept the area. Its internal sensors scanned the floor. The lint ball didn't even register. It was just lint. Worthless. Ignored. The patrol passed without breaking stride. Rostova looked at Gizmo. Gizmo looked at Brick. A shared understanding passed between them. The Cathar logic was holding firm. Their patrols hadn't varied. Their sensors hadn't flagged the growing collection of junk. Brick practiced his clumsy fall, timing it perfectly. Thump! Followed by a convincing groan. It reliably drew the guard's attention for just over a second. Gizmo continued his painstaking work on the lint ball, carefully placing the last few metal shavings. It still looked like something you'd find in a vacuum cleaner bag. But hidden within its fibrous depths was a network of tiny circuits, waiting for a spark, waiting for the perfect moment of illogical opportunity. The Cathar prison was designed to stop everything logical, but it had no defense against determined foolishness. The minutes before the next patrol felt stretched thin, taut like a wire. Brick did his usual noisy warm-up in the corner, each stomp compacting the lint one last time. Gizmo stood near the nutrient dispenser, fidgeting nervously. Rostova knelt near the door, pretending to examine a scuff mark on the floor, the tiny lint ball EMP device concealed in her palm. It felt impossibly light, fragile, useless. Water. Now, Rostova murmured, tracking the seconds in her head. Gizmo splashed his water near the dispenser slot, then started his performance. Seriously? Again? This piece of junk is still leaking, and the clicking, it's driving me mad. He banged on the wall beside the dispenser. Right on schedule, the internal system flagged the noise and complaint. A single Cathar guard detached from its route down the corridor and approached their cell, its insectoid limbs moving precisely. Unit 735, state the malfunction, its flat voice droned. It leaks! It clicks! It's defective! Gizmo insisted, gesturing wildly. The guard lowered its head slightly, likely initiating another pointless diagnostic scan. This was crucial. The guard's presence blocked the cell door sensors from easily noticing small actions right at the threshold. Down the main corridor, Rostova could hear the faint, rhythmic marching of the main patrol. 15.7 minutes. Always. They were approaching. Brick. Now, Rostova whispered. As the patrol drew level with their cell door, Brick let out a convincing yell. Aye! He threw himself backwards, hitting the floor with a solid thump. My ankle! Twisted my ankle! He groaned, clutching his leg. Just as planned, the two guards in the patrol instinctively snapped their multifaceted eyes towards the sudden noise and movement inside the cell. Their programming prioritized assessing potential injury or disruption. Their attention was diverted for precisely 1.2 seconds. In that sliver of time, while the diagnostic guard was focused on the dispenser and the patrol guards were focused on Brick, Rostova acted. She pressed the lint ball against the almost invisible seam where the door met the frame, right over the magnetic locking mechanism. Gizmo, shielded by the diagnostic guard, touched a charged spot on his uniform, then subtly brushed his hand against a specific metal shaving contact point on the lint ball. Nothing happened. No flash. No bang. Just nothing. For a heart-stopping moment, Rostova thought it had failed. Then she pushed gently against the door. Silence. It slid inward half an inch, smooth as air. The EMP, tiny and weak, powered by nothing but static electricity and built from trash, had been just enough. It wasn't strong enough to register on the Cathar sensors as a weapon or a malfunction, likely dismissed as background energy fluctuation, but it had momentarily disrupted the magnetic field holding the door locked. The patrol guards, having assessed Brick's fall as minor self-inflicted harm, turned their attention forward again and continued their march. 15.7 minutes. On schedule. Unaware. The diagnostic guard finished its scan. Dispenser function remains optimal, it buzzed at Gizmo. Cease unfounded complaints. It turned and marched away, not noticing the door was no longer perfectly flush with the wall. As soon as the corridor was clear, Rostova pushed the door open wider. Gizmo grabbed Brick, helping him up with a grin. Nice fall, big guy. Learned it in basic, Brick whispered back, limping dramatically for show before straightening up. They slipped out into the corridor, pulling the door almost closed behind them. It clicked softly as the magnetic lock re-engaged a moment later. They were out. Later, Warden Zylar would review the logs for that cycle. 1406. Unit 735 complaint. Dispenser malfunction. Unfounded. Guard dispatched. 1408. Unit 736. Incident. Minor fall. Self-inflicted. Standard procedure. Observe. 1408. Patrol Unit Delta. Route nominal. No anomalies detected. 1409. Cell 4B door sensor. Status secure. Everything was logical. Everything was recorded. The system reported no errors, no escape vectors. Yet the cell's internal bioscanners, when Zylar checked them later, showed zero human life signs. It didn't compute. Rostova, Gizmo, and Brick moved quickly and quietly through the starbase's service corridors. They timed their movements based on the predictable Cathar schedules Rostova had memorized. Cleaning drones past, duck into an alcove, shift change, hide behind stacked supply crates. The Cathar reliance on rigid logic made them predictable. Their target was Waste Reclamation Sector 9, a place filled with discarded parts, broken tools, refuse chutes, things the Cathar deemed illogical to repair or repurpose. For Gizmo, it was a treasure trove. "Look at this," he whispered excitedly, holding up a damaged guidance module from a sanitation skimmer. "They junked the whole unit because the primary navigation chip failed redundancy checks by 0.02%. I can bypass that in 2 minutes." He found and discarded skimmer, small, designed for automated trash collection runs to orbital dump sites. Working quickly with salvaged tools and parts, Gizmo disabled its internal Cathar network transponder and jury-rigged the manual controls. Back in the monitoring hub, Warden Zylar stared at the replay from Cell 4B, Rostova meticulously gathering lint, Gizmo pointlessly complaining about the dispenser, Brick performing inefficient exercises, useless, random, illogical human behaviors. Then, Zylar cross-referenced the logs with the material composition sensors for the sanitation field. Fibrous debris, trace metallic particles, minute ceramic fragments, all consistently ignored as statistically insignificant. Zylar accessed the design specifications for the magnetic door locks, specifically their shielding against low-level electromagnetic interference. There was a threshold designed to ignore background radiation, a threshold just above the calculated potential energy discharge of... Zylar froze. The warden accessed the skimmer deployment logs for Sector 9. One automated sanitation skimmer had deviated from its scheduled flight path towards the orbital dump site 20 minutes ago, its transponder suddenly going offline. Illogical. Impossible. The Cathar didn't account for weapons built from lint. They didn't calculate the utility of annoyance. They didn't factor in the sheer, stubborn, illogical determination of humans who refused to accept the calculated odds. Warden Zylar slowly looked up from the console, the cold equations finally adding up to an impossible answer. The perfect prison hadn't failed because of a flaw in its logic. It failed because it couldn't comprehend behavior that operated entirely outside of logic. Floating silently away from the starbase in their stolen trash scow, Rostova, Gizmo, and Brick looked back at the receding Vigilant. "Think they know yet?" Brick asked. Gizmo grinned, tweaking the skimmer's controls. "Their logic probably demands proof, and we didn't leave any." Rostova watched the starbase shrink. "They'll learn," she said quietly. "They'll learn that human illogicality isn't always a weakness. Sometimes it's the key."